to Beyond the Grave Radio with Haunted Salem, The Dead Educate the Living, here on YouTube Live Events. Oh, isn't that nice?
Something went dead on a graveyard show?
Yeah, no. There we go. All right, sorry for that, everybody. We are here with my co-host, Roger Bell. Roger, you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody.
And with a very special guest, author, medium, and guide, Chris Dowgin.
Hello there.
Now, with over 10 books, he gives his fans the very best of Salem and its underground tunnels. You can check out his Facebook pages and his websites at salemhousepress.com and salemtunneltour.com. So, Chris, how you doing tonight?
Pretty good. I got stuck in a Salem time warp and almost missed this, but otherwise.
Well, I'm glad to have you on the show.
Thank you.
All right. First, being an author, why don't we start off with telling us how about the books you have written?
The first one I wrote was the beginning of a trilogy. It was called A Walk Through Salem, where you're the main character and you go to the Salem Commons and there's this tree. And every night, in real life actually, the light on the gazebo shines on the flagpole and creates this shadow, and it actually goes across the Commons and splits this tree in half. So I figured, what happens if somebody had this magnet that you met in the Commons, and with the magnet he actually pulls down a large zipper down that shadow on that tree, and you walk through into another world of Salem. And there's a whole set of, there's 3 books attached to the journeys going through into this other world of Salem. Was my 3 first books.
That's very cool.
And you get to be guided through it with Mr. Zach. He's a guy who's kind of like a mixture of Willy Wonka and maybe the Wizard of Oz, and he takes you on this journey.
What about your Salem Underground tunnel books? You have a couple of those, don't you?
Yeah, I got the one, and I'm working on the sequel to it. That one actually came out of the second book of that trilogy I was just mentioned, called A Walk Under Salem. I was researching the stories about the tunnels for a kid's story, and I came up across so much information that I had enough for a 300-page nonfiction book. And at that time, there was a whole bunch of open houses going on that actually had houses connected to tunnels. So I would pretend I was going to buy the house and sneak in and take pictures of the sealed tunnel entrances. And then I also knew a whole bunch of friends who ended up having businesses or homes attached to the tunnels. So they just let me crawl through their basements and take pictures. And that's what that one came about.
Now that's awesome.
Almost.
Because me and Roger were just talking. We tried to get as much information about the underground tunnels as we could. And if you Google it, you can't find any information about the underground tunnels. It's like it's secret. And it goes right to your books, and it wants you to buy your book and read your book. And it's really weird because you can't find any information. I was just curious. I mean, they're really that secretive about the underground tunnels of Salem, huh?
Yeah. Well, Salem they're guilty. We have the witchcraft trials, and people who there's wealthy families or not so wealthy families in town who are still connected to it. And also there was a murder in 1830 of this Joseph White, and when someone came from the Smithsonian magazine to do an article on it, nobody who actually was related to the person or the events, descendants of those people, and it's been 170 years later, nobody would talk to them. So they don't like to bring up much about anything in this time.
Oh, wow.
And the tunnels they were in a place where, like, if you want to know about maybe a neighborhood and all the fun stuff, go find a 10-year-old kid in his neighborhood, and he could tell you all the stories and lore and everything about his neighborhood. And they forget a little while. But then you get some people in their 70s who like to talk about their childhood again, and they'll start talking about the tunnels in their neighborhoods. So you get a lot of stories from that, too.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we'll definitely get to all that. I have a couple questions for you first. Now, you can find Chris's books on Amazon.com, so you definitely want to check those out. Being a medium.
Also have Barnes and Noble.
What's that?
They also have Barnes and Noble as well.
Oh,
too.
Barnes and Nobles? All right, awesome.
Yeah.
Being a medium, have you been sensitive since childhood?
Yeah, but not knowing completely. The first ghost I seen was when I was maybe 10 in my parents' front yard in New Jersey, Pine Barrens. I look out the window, and it was that Apache fog, that kind of rolling fog,
Okay.
and there was a colonial man in colonial dress leaning on either a musket or a shovel, and his wife with the big bustle dress and that kind of like kerchief. I don't know, is that what it's called? Like they used to colonial, like you put all your hair in it, and there was a baby crawling on the lawn. So, and occasionally in my parents' house, you would see a dismembered foot coming from behind the refrigerator, and
Okay.
then nobody would follow it, or I see it in a hand.
Oh, wow.
But it really didn't really pick up on anything until maybe it was 22.
Okay. Now, what are your abilities? Are you like an empath? Can you see, hear, talk, such as those things?
Clear, claircognizant, empath. If I really zone out and get bored in a bar while someone's playing darts, I can actually control the darts, but I can't do it on actually on purpose. It just happens to
Really?
happen.
That is so cool.
Mediumship. A lot of times, people when they die, they visit me in the morning, and then
Okay.
I usually help them on for 2.5 weeks until they get adjusted to the next place.
That's very cool. I would love to have those abilities
But
because I love to help. Could you shut it off, turn
yeah,
it off and off
and
like
I
a
help move
switch?
different ghosts on. Yeah,
Uh,
mostly like say the divination stuff. I like to use tools so it doesn't can get into my head. I don't leave myself open. I let it go through the tools, either with runes or tarot. I get more omens and things that might happen. People visit on their own.
Now, do you do
I was
readings at
wondering if that
all?
people. Yeah, I do runes and tarot and past life, dream interpretations.
That's fascinating. I
I
find
have
that very
to go for a
fascinating.
second. I'll be right back.
Sure, do what you gotta do, Roger.
Hold on, let me go over here and okay, where is it? Well,
Okay, there he goes. All right, so Chris, being a guide, you want to tell the listeners what you do in Salem?
I run this tour called the Salem Smugglers Tour, and it gives you the history of the conspiracy to build these tunnels. They were engineered by Liza Haskell Derby Jr. He was the son of America's first millionaire. His father still ranks as the 10th richest person in American history. So this is around the time that Thomas Jefferson, they call it a quiet revolution, is Jefferson defeated all the Federalists and opened up more of a, there's a
Yep.
dog and it goes,
Hold on. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So Thomas Jefferson, he wins this quiet revolution. He defeats the Federalists who wanted more of a aristocracy that runs this country. With there he goes again.
Yeah, I know. It's you
With
know what?
Hamilton.
All right, problem solved. That my for everyone that's listening and watching right now, my smoke detector has gone off 6 times already, like by itself, and I'm not even smoking, so we took care of that problem. But go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chris.
No problem. So it was a quiet revolution. Jefferson defeated all the Federalists who wanted this country to be more of a aristocracy. So he was opening the way for more of the average people. And part of doing that, he started raising these custom duties on all these Federalists within the New England seaboard. And they didn't want to pay these taxes. So the son of America's first millionaire decides to extend the tunnels in town for 3 miles. So a bunch of politicians who shaped our country didn't have to pay duties or taxes on the goods that came brought into Salem. And they were able to smuggle the stuff from their warehouses on wharfs to their homes, to the stores, and then take the proceeds and bring it into banks. And also, if they didn't want to sell their goods in town, there was an underground train station they could smuggle their goods out of as well. So the
Okay.
people that he conscripted to pay for these tunnels were something called the Salem Commons Improvement subscribers. So underneath the guise of actually beautifying the local park in town, they filled in 5 ponds, they leveled the hills and graded and put a bunch of trees and a nice fence around it. And they used the descendants of the first National Guard unit in the country to do all the work. And what they really were doing was they were hiding all the tunnel dirt that they were producing after digging the tunnels, going around the commons and connecting them to all these new brick homes. And the people who paid for this was a Superior Court justice, a bunch of senators and congressmen, 2 secretaries of state, a secretary of the Navy, a bunch of the local mayors, half the custom agency was involved in smuggling, and all the ship captains in town.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of an elaborate plot just to defraud the government their duties. And the custom agency actually says between 1801 and 1805, within the first 4 years of these tunnels being extended, that the amount of tonnage or duties on goods coming from overseas dropped in half. So they were productive in this skullduggery.
Now, have you
But
Yeah.
the other things going on there too. Yeah. Oh, the other things, like some of the news in town. There was one of the most interesting guys was a guy named Stephen White. And Stephen White would have all these political marriages. He was married to Joseph Story, who was a Superior Court justice who did the most interpretations on our Constitution that we follow still today. He married his sister. Then
Oh,
he
wow.
had his 2 daughters be related to Daniel Webster by marriage. And Daniel Webster was his Wizard of Oz. So he was the man behind the curtain pulling Daniel Webster's strings. And he tried to get him elected president, and that failed a couple times. But they did get him to become Secretary of State for William Harrison.
Huh.
Now, Stephen White first comes into, like, people's memories. I was just talking about that murder of Joseph White in 1830.
Yes.
That was his uncle. And his uncle had invested heavily into the Second Bank of the United States. It's what we call the Federal Reserve now, in its earlier forms.
Okay.
And his uncle needed revenge on 2 business partners. So he planned his own murder, and he allowed his nephew to do it. And then he was able to blame the murder on his 2 business partners' children. And he had 3 of them hung, 2 of the Knapp family and 1 from the Crown and Shield family. And after they got away with this murder, now Daniel Webster was a prosecuting attorney who actually got these people hung. He would actually probably be involved in murdering Isaac Parker, who was the state Superior Court justice, because the case was already, like, they had these 2 Knapp brothers, and they were acquitted of the crime because of hired to kill the old man. Supposedly hung himself from a low window with his knees almost touching the ground. So they couldn't prove he actually did the murder. How can you try these other people as accessories?
Yeah.
So they were already set free, and there was mistrials and whatnot, and persecute these guys. Now, Isaac Parker, who's actually related to the Parker Brothers Game Company, will die mysteriously. So 3 days before he died, he said, "I never missed a day on the bench, and I've never felt better." 3 days later, he's dead.
Wow.
So Daniel Webster actually chooses the next Superior Court justice, and since this is a murder trial, but the person had to acquit himself, the person he handpicked to become the new state Superior Court justice, because he actually had set free 2 gentlemen, and he couldn't be trying somebody else on the same murder. So after all that work of possibly murdering somebody, Daniel Webster had to go with a 3rd choice and judge. Now, Daniel Webster and Stephen White had planned this, and they got away with this one murder already. Now they get emboldened enough that they put Daniel Webster in as Secretary of State for William Harrison as war hero. He was just kind of a puppet. You know, he was very popular after winning this war. I think it was the Mexican War, and it was good PR around him and everything. And they figured they could just control his strings. And the main thing they wanted him to do was to establish something called the Third Bank in the United States. See, in 1836, Andrew Jackson had actually canceled the charter of the Second Bank in the United States, which led to a couple of assassination attempts against him.
Wow.
Well, it also led to George Peabody, who Peabody Mass is named after.
Yeah.
He was working with Rothschild, and he actually created the 1837 panic in response to Jackson getting rid of that bank, because he was selling shares off to England, to the Bank of England, to the Baring brothers, the Brown brothers, and the Rothschilds. So England was losing money, because the thing was that we're not too sure if we actually won a Revolutionary War, because we get John Adams and Hamilton, and they create the first bank in the United States, and they give all their money over to English investors. So who controls the government? The people who control the money, or they control the presidency or the Congress? Or probably more likely who controls the money, because you could buy the rest. So now the second bank in the United States, Jackson had noticed that all these foreign investors were controlling our money. That's why he got rid of it. So now that Joseph White, who was murdered, who invested heavily into the second bank in the United States, now also Joseph Story and Daniel Webster, they were directors of that bank in Boston. So they were going to lose money too when Jackson got rid of the bank. So now it's very important for them and George Peabody to have the Third Bank in the United States created again, so they could sell off our country once more to England, so that these banks in England could make some money again. So they get William Harrison up as president, and his main goal, they tell him, is to create the Third Bank in the United States. Well, Daniel Webster writes his inaugural address, which is going to mention the bank and creating it, and William Harrison looks at him and says, "No, I'm going to write my own." And also, Daniel Webster's partner in crime was Henry Clay, a Southerner. It was Calhoun, Clay, and Webster were the three real power brokers at the time. And Clay is banned from the White House because of this banking issue. But Daniel Webster is still trying to control him a little bit. And William Harrison goes off and does his inaugural address in a snowstorm for like an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's supposed to be the longest inaugural address in history. And Daniel Webster later would comment that he would actually die of pneumonia because of that long-winded speech. Actually, William Harrison would die of typhoid.
Oh, wow.
And he would only last a month in office. So when he didn't do what he was told, most likely Daniel Webster and his son, Daniel Fletcher Page, was the clerk of state, which is like the third most powerful position.
Wow.
And this Dr. Miller, but he only was really on his deathbed. And they already got a way of murdering Joseph White in Salem. And it's easy enough to kill someone by typhoid. Alexander the Great was killed by typhoid, assassinated by it. There was people in the 1920s, there was a woman who killed 5 husbands by typhoid. And really, to make typhoid, you need to get some urine, some feces, put it in water, shake it up a little bit, and wait a couple of weeks, and you made typhoid. Now you just have to drop that on someone's food. You know, typhoid Mary would make your hamburger and kill you.
Oh,
accidentally,
wow.
But I think Daniel Webster might have done that.
That's crazy.
So the funny thing now about Stephen White, who's also the guy who built up East Boston, he's the one who had owned it and built the hotel and made original houses out there. He was trying to create railroads coming through so they could have a shipping industry there. He was the Republic. What was it? It was originally called the National Republican Party before it became the Whigs, which William Harrison was voted in as a Whig member. And so Stephen White had all this power. He's the guy who incorporated the Peabody Essex Museum back when it was at Salem East India Marine Museum. So he built the oldest part of the Marine Hall.
Welcome back, Roger.
Just behind the scenes guy.
Welcome.
We're getting a history lesson.
And the funny thing is,
man, I missed it.
yes, he would.
Go ahead, Chris.
It wasn't much. But Stephen White, who might have actually planned this murder, actually dies 3 days after Harrison does, which is strange.
Oh, wow.
But on his own, Danny Webster may actually go out and then kill Zachary Taylor and probably President Polk as well. Because Zachary Taylor would die when he wanted to create the third bank in the United States. And Polk, who was a Democrat, not a Whig like Taylor or Harrison was, he dies within 3 months after office and 11 months before Taylor does. And all three were against creating that bank, and all three of them die from typhoid.
Oh, wow. It's that easy to make,
So
huh?
Salem has all these interesting stories. Yeah, usually typhoid came about if your sewage is close to your public water supply and there's a leak between the two. That's where you have like typhoid or maybe a cholera outbreak, like that.
All right. Now, I know
So
I
there
lived
was
in a... Yep.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say. Now I know I lived in a haunted house in Salem. Have you lived in any haunted houses in Salem or any experiences in Salem that you want to share?
So many.
Really?
Um,
Probably because of your sensitivity.
yeah.
You're just surrounded by it, huh?
Sort of, but also I've been turned into like the town psychiatrist since I was 12, and I think sometimes there's things out there that doesn't want you to help people. So there's sometimes it could be around trying to be helped, so you can be there to just harass you. The first house I lived in that was haunted in this area was the Poor Estate up in Danvers on the corner of 62 and 35. It's that yellow house with the big peach tree.
Yep.
Well, Frank Poor, he was the founder of Sylvania light bulbs, and he's the guy who built the Hawthorne Hotel.
Yep.
And I lived in the carriage house originally, and there was all these weird dreams and things would happen there. And then I moved into the main mansion, and the carriage house was attached to the mansion, then it was set back, and then they built a servants' quarter attached to the mansion. So there were stories about the servant who had an affair with Frank Poor, and her ghosts would go up and down the stairs making noises, and she caught my one friend in bed. I guess it would be the succubus. She was sitting on her chest. No, the incubus. She was sitting on her chest and wouldn't let her get up out of bed. And it took her a half hour to move again. So I've always heard these stories, and then when I moved into the servants' quarters, probably her place, I was in bed one morning, and I feel this person kissing my neck. And then she feels my belly, sees how wide I am. She rolls over, and she nuzzles back in, and she starts kissing my neck again. And I open my eyes, and no one's there. And my girlfriend at the time was in the bathroom. So a couple of weeks later, I take my first attempt in the medium, and I learned 15 years later I have failed horribly. So I said out loud with my girlfriend there, hoping that this woman could hear it, and I pretty much said that she waited 40, 50 years, whatever, for this person to divorce his wife. They both were dead. He never divorced her, and she was still waiting. She deserved better. He was an idiot. Well, I guess I insulted both of them. And then 15 years later, I realized that they would haunt him the whole time. Wow. And some of the things that they would do is that if I was with a woman who was insecure or she could get drunk, the woman could sneak into her and then control them a little bit.
That's fascinating.
So that was the first house.
Wow.
It's aggravating.
I bet it is. I bet it is. Okay, well, I'm going to give a little history lesson here about Salem, and then we're going to go into some questions, if that's okay. You may recognize Salem from your history lessons. This was where the infamous Salem witch trials of 1692 happened. It all began in the winter of 1692 when some girls fell ill and blamed members of the community for their affliction. Hundreds of innocent people were accused during the hysteria, And ultimately, 19 men and women were hanged, and one man was pressed to death. Learn the details of the Salem witch trials of 1692 at the Salem Witch Museum, the Wax Museum of Witches and Seafarers, the Witch House, and the Witch History Museum. You can become part of the recreations of the trials at the Witch Dungeon or Cry Innocent. But don't limit yourself. There's much more to Salem than just trials of 1692. Salem industries have included fishing, shipbuilding, overseas trade, where millions were made by Salem's sea captains. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution brought leather tanneries and cotton mills to Salem. America's first millionaire lived in Salem. You mentioned that, Chris. They made their money in overseas trades and brought plenty of precious cargo and money home to Salem. The legacy of their wealth lines. Salem streets in the forms of incomparable architecture and unique museums. Their legacies can be witnessed at the Peabody Essex Museum, the House of Seven Gables, the Salem Maritime National Historic Site, and Stephen Phillips Memorial Trust House. Now, in fact, our country's military heritage began in 1636 when the first muster occurred on Salem Commons. Today, the National Guard traces its roots to the first muster. Salem residents and supply contributed to the French and Indian War, Revolutionary War, Civil War, Spanish War, and both World Wars. From Salem privateers roaming the seas during the Revolution to the Coast Guard storing seaplanes at Winter Island during World War II, Salem has a proud military history. You can witness this proud heritage throughout the Nathaniel Bowditch Trail and the new Armory Park and through the museum expositions and historical markers throughout the city. So, Roger, why don't you give us a little lesson here?
Okay. In 1801, Elias Haskett Derby Jr. leaves his 2-year retirement. His father, the country's first millionaire, has left him a money pit that many would consider one of the nation's first American castles. The expense to keep up this mansion and his leisurely lifestyle has forced Elias back into action. He will take command of the local militia to fill in the ponds in the common as part of an elaborate plot. The plot would entail the beautification of this neighborhood and entice a series of merchants and ship captains to build a series of 2 grand brick mansions set apart at fixed locations around the new park, all attached to a series of smuggling tunnels that would lead from the wharf to their stores and the banks. An elaborate scheme filled with masons, pirates, and a Secretary of the Navy, senators, representatives, a Supreme Court justice, presidents, and a touch of murder. Dig into the tunnels of Salem and find the underbelly of the nation. Now, I have some questions on this. Did Elias Jr. not work? I mean, did he live off his dad's money till it started to dry up?
Yeah, well, he was originally overseas running the Followers Maritime Empire. The funny thing about Eliza Haskett Derby Sr. was that he had all these ships and he opened up the China trade, but he never went on a boat himself. He just owned them. So he sends his son out to be the person who is, running all the contracts, taking care of the ships overseas. And he gets a letter one day mentioning that his father had died. And he comes back to Salem and he gets this mansion, which is now where Old Town Hall is. And his father only got to live in it for a year before he passed on. So he decided he just wanted to go into retirement. His father's estate is the 10th largest estate in American history he had inherited. And somehow, this, like, take maybe a Rockefeller for a Gates and a Buffett and put them together, and that was maybe the fortune he was left behind, and he started running through it. The mansion was huge, the gardens were expensive, the heating of the place was immense, and he had this grand playboy lifestyle. And it lasted about 2 years until he got nervous. and then he will then go into the building these tunnels for about
Okay,
like about 12 years.
basically,
So
uh,
by 1815, he would stop it, and then he would actually try one more time to go out to sea. He makes a bad choice in commodity, almost loses his shirt, and he's walking around Spain, and he finds all these sheep that were scared by Napoleon's army fighting on the other side of the mountain. So he gathers 2,000 sheep, brings it back to America. It was merino wool and was nice and soft. And he goes into the sheep business and retires up into New Londonderry, New Hampshire. So interesting end for him.
so he started raising sheep. Okay,
Yeah.
and see, I kind of got the idea, and I didn't have much to go on here, but I kind of got the idea, and you said that he lived a playboy lifestyle, which brought up the next
Yeah.
question that I was going to ask you. Um, and I was thinking that, he was more like a bum who went through his inheritance and had to come up with the means and the a quick way to raise free profits to keep his mansion and everything going.
Yeah.
Okay, the expense to keep
And
up
his
with
first step in doing it,
the expense was so high, in his lifestyle. Um, so I'm getting that at this point he got the idea to get goods out without paying taxes and stuff, and that way he saved all this money. I assume it's taxes. It's like it
he
says
was probably,
duties, but I'm assuming it's talking about taxes and all this stuff.
yeah, duties are, even today, if you bring something through customs, you have to pay duties. And,
Oh,
so they were
okay.
bringing goods and raw materials and finished
Yeah.
coming in at the seaport, and they were supposed to be paying duties on this all. But
So he
half the
figured
custom
out a way
agency was
around it.
involved in the smuggling plan. Yeah.
Okay, now
So he conscripted a bunch of people.
yeah. So I'm kind of at a loss to figure out how he took command of the local military.
It was kind of like defunct at the time. There, after the Revolutionary War, they didn't really come back together again. And the part of the Jefferson plan was in collecting these new duties on the customs. Was he wanted all the local militias to help enforce it and collect these duties. So Liza Haskell Derby Jr. he elected himself general of the local militia that he reformed,
Oh, okay.
and they were housed out of the property where the Hawthorne Hotel is now. It was a building called the Franklin Building where they were housed out of right there. So he actually put back together a militia before a real one could actually be formed. And it was more of a social thing at that time. So like you could become a major or a colonel or a general, so you can dress up really nice and go to the balls and have women fall for you. And it
Right.
was probably the major reason why you joined the militia.
Okay. So my next question is how did he get this whole link of people to work the scam for him?
Well, these were all Federalists. They were in opposition to Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans. They had very close ties to England. Their money was going back there. They really were citizens who really didn't want another nation. They were more of people who wanted a better stake as being a colony. They wanted to be a British colony with more rights, and they didn't and more profit in part of the United Kingdom. So they were disguising things slightly, like their colors are black and white, like they paint their chimneys up and down Federal Street black and white. But during the Revolutionary War, you would paint your chimney black and white if you were a British supporter. They weren't really hiding things too much, so they're very open against Jefferson, and they were aristocrats. They don't believe in the common person having a right. They common person shouldn't be electing a senator. It was originally congressmen who were elected senators. Um so they can't find Eliza Haskell Derby Jr., who comes up with this plot to help them save on their duties and not raise money for their opposition, Jefferson. Also, Timothy Pickering in town, who would be the person who wrote the Alien Sedition Act. And the sedition part, or the alien part of that, was that if you were French, they could deport you because you would have most likely voted for Jefferson. So, I mean, that's how much they really despised their opposition in the political party. And Derby had offered them a way to save on money, and they went for it.
Huh. That's very interesting.
Also, there was Ralph Waldo Emerson, grandmother's brother, who had just started doing these vaulted arches, or these new arched tunnels going in the old hill fort. And they used his technology and expertise to design the new tunnels, and they learned to connect them to the houses by Charles Bulfinch, who was a guy who was the architect of D.C., who built all the tunnels inside of our capital. And Bulfinch would have built 4 buildings in Salem and Old Town Hall, and the old Derby Mansion was his plans that all had tunnels coming through the fireplace arches.
That's amazing. I would love to live in those old houses with those tunnels and secret doorways. That's so cool. But I actually have a question for you. Now, you mentioned that the series of smuggling tunnels would lead from the wharf to their stores to their banks. Why would the banks need an underground tunnel system?
Well, if you were bringing money, money that you made through goods that you smuggled, you probably want to have a good record of your sales. So that way you were able to bring your money back into the tunnels. And then sometimes these banks actually had back doors into the vaults. Like there is a bank vault that's now in the building where Rockefeller's housed, in the old Daniel Loeb building.
So
it's in the alleyway between the Eastern Bank and Rockefeller.
What's that, Roger?
I said,
No,
so basically
one
that
of them.
was the first money laundering scheme.
It could be on the top 10 of the earliest ones.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, right?
And
They
then
were
if you didn't want to sell you good,
to the banks, and the banks were, I guess, storing their money, and they weren't advertising it. Well, yeah, so and so brought in 20,000 last week, and we got it the vault back there, So it's kind of like they were laundering their money for them, cleaning it up.
yeah. And most of these banks were owned by these smugglers too.
Well, and that makes sense then.
Stephen White. Yeah. And then on top of all that, how they owned the banks, are able to smuggle into it. There was people like Stephen White and Daniel Webster and Joseph Story, who they had heavy investments in Second Bank in the United States, or they were directors in the bank. So not only were they being able to hide their money, but they got to play with the country's money and do what they wanted with it.
Exactly.
All right, now going into these tunnels, I have a couple questions for you, Chris. Do you do a lot of investigations in the underground tunnels?
We did some. The building where the gathering used to be, the old Norm Keg Trust bank building, the last bank was in there was the Eastern Bank. I think they got out in maybe '96 on the corner of Derby Square there.
Yep.
We would going into that basement, and the basement's actually 6 different foundations put together. So all the hallways in that one basement are the actual tunnels that ran between the buildings. And now you wouldn't even know about it until you start looking at the walls and seeing sealed up archways in the basement walls. And so in there, one of the properties I think originally burnt down in 1899, and I think there would be the second fire on that location. So there would have been people. I think there was a widow Manning and a widow Dodge who died in the fire. I think the first one, and the second one. There could have been bank employees and things could have died in the fire. But also in that basement, is a tomb of two runaway slaves who were coming through Salem on the Underground Railroad. There's this concrete slab beneath a staircase. It's 12 feet long, 3 feet wide, 3 feet high. We've had mediums come through and say, yes, there's two bodies in there. Somebody cracked a hole in the bottom of the cement, and it started smelling like dead rats for a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
And it's underneath a staircase, which is a symbol of a Jacob's ladder or a stairway to heaven. And the other place in town that would have a Jacob's ladder would be the Joshua Ward house, where it was Sheriff Corrin's address or house previously, and there was a lien on his body, and his wife couldn't bury his body until she paid off the lien, so she buried him in the basement of the house underneath the staircase, another Jacob's ladder. So we've done paranormal investigations in that building where the gathering was, and we've had news of the ghosts. You know, someone asked, "Are you afraid?" And the ghost said, "No, scared." We had pictures of orbs showing up around people. I used to actually go in the basement there and play flute. There was an open mic that would be upstairs.
Oh, wow.
And I would practice downstairs because it had a nice canyon sound. And the ghosts would come up to me. And usually how you help a ghost move on is you say, well, you might enjoy being here, but think of somewhere that you're really happy in life and know that you could actually be there again. And then that's when you would hear different towns show up in your head, and they would leave. So all these different spirits would come up, and I would hear all these towns after I told them they could go wherever they were most happiest show up in my head. And then later on, people would want to do paranormal investigations down there. And I guess I wasn't the best businessman because I was thinking, shoot, I think I sent them all away. But the thing about ghosts is that they only talk to people they would have talked to in life. So I'm a certain type of personality. And there's another personality who might see me on the street, 1,000 times and never say hi. And the same thing is for ghosts. When you're dead, you don't really change that much. So people were able to go down in that basement and investigate, and they can have an interaction with the ghosts because they're different people.
That's very interesting. Now, how private are these tunnels? I'm assuming not everyone can go through them, right? You'd have to get permission to go through them?
Yeah, and most of them don't go too far anymore because after about 1950, there was no real smugglers in town anymore. Prohibition's over, maybe the last thing really being used for them. And you say
so
about
you can't go through
1950
them
that they were being stopped being used. No, you could still. They're still there. It just that the new owners of these buildings started didn't want rats, the water, and strangers coming through their houses, so they started blocking them off.
Aww.
Even the William Parker house up on Pleasant Street, there was a person who maybe said 15 years ago he's seen an iron door in their basement, but by the time I got there, it was just a granite sealed up wall.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned these tunnels go to different people's houses. Why don't you tell us what houses they go to? I'm kind of curious.
It's easier to say which houses they don't go to.
Really?
Yeah, the main thing you're looking at to find them is if it's a house that has 4 exterior chimneys. The tunnels are connected through the fireplace arches in the basement. It eliminates a problem of dripping on your head as you're leaving the tunnel into your house. It could be poor flashing. Now the tunnels are built, 3 feet to 6 feet into the house, so they became watertight. And the other thing that's going on is that now every time you open up the door from the tunnel to the house, it creates a draw system up through the fireplace and up through the chimney, sucking fresh air into the tunnels. So if you walk through town and you see the chimneys that line up with each other, it's a way to find out which homes are connected by the tunnels. The Joshua Ward house is connected, Old Town Hall, City Hall, the Daniel house.
So House of Seven Gables.
House on the wharf there.
Custom House, yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Actually, back when the Mayor Driscoll, supposedly she was a counselor there when she was going to Salem State College, and a friend of mine who's a bit younger was staying at that camp there, and he says that they actually got to sleep in the tunnels back then at the house at Seven Gables.
Wow, that's amazing. See, I find all this stuff very fascinating. I have one question for you, and that question is the Grinshaw House, the Elizabeth Peabody Grinshaw House. Okay, that house fascinates me. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite houses in Salem. It's at the burial point right there, next to the burial point in Salem. What can you tell me about that house? I can't find any information about who owns it, about anything that goes on in that house, like, at all. I was wondering if you could shed some light upon that house, just because it's one of my favorites.
I think the guy's name, it was still in the Peabody family. And
Does someone live there?
the guy who just died, I believe his name is Percival. There might be someone still there. There had been people there for years. I'm not sure at the moment after he died or not, if his wife stayed there or not. But he was Percival Peabody, and he was, a descendant of Sophia, Hawthorne's wife. And he also owned, the Ropes Garden is?
Yeah.
Up on Essex Street?
Yes.
Okay. You know that abandoned house behind it? He owned that property. And
Okay.
he went to the town and had asked them, can I turn this into an old age home for men? And the town denied him. Now, next to that property is that carriage house, which is also abandoned. And he wanted to convert that that carriage house into condos, but he wanted to put stucco on it, and it wasn't historical, and the town denied him a second time. At that point, he said that all my properties in town were rot to be an embarrassment to you. So that's why the house is falling apart next to the graveyard.
That's one of my favorite houses.
My 11th book, Mr. Pellinger's House, and the book, Mr. Pellinger's House and Intergalactic Roadshow is set on that abandoned house behind the Ropes Garden.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But he's also married to either a Carnegie or a Mellon.
He's married to who?
Either a descendant of a Carnegie or a Mellon. I always get the two mixed up because they always mention Carnegie Mellon.
Oh, okay.
So they're quite wealthy, and in his will, it says that they can't do anything to actually fix up his properties or else they will lose them. The only thing they could do is do anything that keeps the house from being condemned.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I was just there the other night taking pictures of the place, and I caught some interesting pictures. I was just curious about it. It's one of my favorite places. But let's talk a little bit about Gallows Hill. Everyone knows Gallows Hill is where the witch, the Salem witch trial victims were executed and buried, and it remains a mystery to this day. Now, basically, many people believe that the real Gallows Hill is located on Walgreens, located on Boston Street, which would place the hanging tree somewhere along the North River. And I guess, they even confirmed that, too, recently. So I was kind of curious what your thoughts were about, today's Gallows Hill versus where people believe it is now near the Walgreens at the North River. Where do you think the real Gallows Hill is?
The corner of Proctor and Pope Street. I had a friend who was a city engineer, and he said on the old city maps, there's a triangular piece of property on the corner of Proctor and Pope that they will never sell because that's where the town had believed that the hanging trees were.
Really?
And it is pretty close to where they're talking about the lead behind Walgreens.
Behind Walgreens, and they're saying the hanging trees should be somewhere on the North River. Is what they're saying.
Yeah, well, the North River did come up to that ledge, so that's a lot of fill right there.
Yeah.
And I still think it's on a corner of Proctor and Pope, which is just a little bit higher to the left of that ledge right there. The thing about Pope Road is that these people are Protestants, so they dislike the Pope. And now any street in a Protestant town that was called Pope Lane or Pope Road or Pope Street would lead to the dung pile or the garbage pit, showing their hatred of the Pope.
Huh.
So if you were going to take people up somewhere you despised or thought they were witches or less of a person, you would then take them up Pope's Lane, where the dung pile is, and hang them there.
Oh, wow.
Also, the weird twist to things is there was a guy who robbed a bank in New Hampshire, and he was chased by police all the way to Salem, and he actually goes to where that corner is where they probably hung the people, and he captures the people in the home by gunpoint. And I think there was a police officer who had the dumb luck of jumping in the guy's house and taking his family ransom. But he goes all the way from New Hampshire, and he goes all the way through Salem, and he has to pick anywhere in town, and he might have picked the place where they hung everybody.
Huh.
It would have been right in front of that triangle piece of property is where he kidnapped the people.
Wow. That's wild. Where the Gallows Hill is today, experiences have been seen in the park area are mists, orbs, they hear cries, electronic equipment malfunctions, people have been touched, a woman's hair has been pulled, and hundreds of photos showing ghosts, energies, and even angels. So my question is to you, if this is not the original Gallows Hill, why do you think all this supposed activity is taking place there?
Well, ghosts have a sense of humor. We were in the tunnels underneath the Downing block where Witch Tease is now.
Okay, yeah.
A couple of years ago when the New England Paranormal Society had a convention, and I was helping them run the investigations in the basement there. And it had I think it's called Ghost Fox, or a newer version of it on their phone.
Okay.
And I guess it takes a bunch of white noises until it can actually make words out. And the ghost in the tunnel kept playing with their head. It kept saying Tituba or Sarah Osgood. And it's sort of like you came to Salem to find ghosts, and the ghosts know that what you want to hear. So it kept saying Tituba, Tituba.
Yeah.
And, being a little bit of a psychic, you felt like, well, the ghosts were playing with them.
Wow.
So now everybody thinks that Gallows Hill is where this stuff had happened, the park. So if you were a ghost, would you want to go play with people's head too?
Yeah, no, I hear you. No, you have a great point there. Thank you for that. Roger, you want to take us into the custom house?
Yes, ma'am. Give me just a second there. I was off answering somebody's thing.
No problem. Take your time. Take your time.
Another history lesson, folks, or a little bit of one. The Custom House was constructed in 1818 and is located at Derby Wharf. 1847 through 1849, Nathaniel Hawthorne was employed here as a custom surveyor. He was terminated from employment due to constant claims of seeing ghosts walking through the halls of the Custom House. Most of his time on the clock was spent writing his novel, The Scarlet Letter. The Scarlet Letter is about Hester Prynne, who conceives a daughter through an affair and struggles to create a new life of repentance and dignity. This lady is found guilty of adultery and is required to wear a scarlet A on her dress to shame her, and she must stand on the scaffold for 3 hours to be exposed to the public humiliation. Employee experiences are hearing ghosts of ship captains discussing treasured items and desired trades aboard their ships. They hear footsteps and experience flickering lights. The Custom House is now a museum that is open for guided tours. All of the furnishings are original, and that's awesome, which is pretty rare to find. The Custom House was built in 1819 and was run by the United States government. The inspectors who were employed there were responsible for weighing and inspecting cargo, as well as filling out all the documentation that goes along with those duties. Now, my question, sir, could you tell us who Hester Prynne was and about the Scarlet Letter?
You have to find a book they haven't read, which is rare.
Wow.
Okay. Were the ghosts of these ship captains honorable, or were they pirates?
Well, do you know the difference between a privateer and a pirate?
A privateer is somebody
Just a
who
piece of paper.
works for themselves, I would think. Kind of like a truck driver who's independent. And a pirate, of course, goes
Well, a
around
private.
robbing people.
Well, they both
I
rob
mean, he works.
people, but the one gets a more. Um,
I'm sorry.
oh, no problem. Both rob people, but one has the permission from a government to attack a particular other country. So there ain't much difference. Even Blackbeard the pirate, he was actually a privateer, but his paperwork lapsed.
Okay, yeah. Now that you mention that, I remember reading something about that one time. They actually had permission from their government to go out and do this stuff, and I forget the reasoning behind it, but in other words, they were legalized pirates.
Yes.
And of course,
made their money as legalized pirates.
Yeah, your regular run-of-the-mill pirates were the ones who were just out for themselves.
Now, you did mention that there were tunnels leading to the Custom House and Derby Wharf, so obviously there were tunnels all through there that they brought in through the ships and went under the tunnels.
Yeah, it was like the 5th custom house in town, where the trolley depot where you buy tickets is there the custom house right beforehand.
Yeah.
So when they first dug all these tunnels, that was the custom house they were smuggling out of. The current one that we know now in front of Derby Wharf was originally George Crowninshield's mansion.
Really?
Who was a smuggler. And what they tend to do in Salem is that you take the top of the building off and leave the foundation or the basement intact. So all these smugglers in town didn't trust each other. So it took about like 5 or 6 different contractors to actually build that building to keep them all quasi-honest to each other, at least, on who had access to the tunnels coming out of the custom house.
Wow, that's amazing. You are just a world full of knowledge. I love it. For those who are listening, Derby Wharf is where the Friendship is located. It was used in the Revolutionary War as a base. Salem, Massachusetts is a seaport. In about 1762, the colony's first millionaire merchant named Elias Haskett Derby started construction on the wharf that today bears his name. Many experiences there are people seeing pirates climbing out of the water onto the wharf, walking around as if they were searching for something. They hear sounds of footsteps coming up behind them. People feel cold air and 80-degree temperatures. Some have seen pirates walking around. Excuse me. One woman was touched by cold fingers only to turn around to see an 1800s fisherman attire dematerialize into thin air. So my question is were there any Revolutionary War ghosts seen?
Not that I know. The really only story I know about paranormal about the wharf is there was this guy who actually looked like Rasputin, and he owned this shop in town.
Really?
And he was sort of a womanizer, and he would give these various women who were dating at the same time jewelry. And these women, at least 2 of them have met on separate occasions who haven't met each other, would walk to the end of the wharf and throw the jewelry that he gave them into the water. So there's something about that point, and people who dated him would go at the end and chuck their jewelry in. So metal detector and scuba diving set, you know. Maybe he could make a little quick money.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Very interesting. All right, Roger, what do you got on the house?
The House of the Seven Gables, located at 115 Derby Street in Salem. A local sea captain named John Turner built the house in 1668. and in 1782 was sold to Captain Samuel Ingersoll. Captain Ingersoll died at sea and left the house to his daughter, Susanna, which was Nathaniel Hawthorne's cousin. There is where Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote the novel The House of the Seven Gables. The structure did not originally have seven gables, as they were added over time, and several of them were actually removed at one point to make it appear like a standard house. However, it has been restored to its state with seven gables. The spooky-looking house, along with its eerie inner passageways, has a reputation of being haunted. Some of the staff and guests claim to have seen Susan Ingersoll's ghost walking in the hallways or peering out the windows. Others have seen a ghost boy playing in the attic area. Footsteps have been heard on the upper floors. He plays with his toys. Travelers visiting the home have seen faces in the window, tapping on the glass and whispering in their ear as they walk along the guided tour. Some of the guests feel uncomfortable up in the attic area, as though someone is watching them. They say they feel dizzy and off balance. Some witnesses have seen the rocking chair in the attic move on its own. Others believe they brought a spirit or two back home with them after taking the tour. Susanna Ingersoll seems to be the spirit that frequents the mansion the most. She has been seen peering out of the upper floor windows only to disappear. Some witnesses have seen her apparition roaming the various rooms and hallways, and again disappears quickly as she appeared. Susan's spirit frequents the outside of the home as well, as she has been spotted in the gardens, which she loved dearly. The noisiest ghost is said to be that of a young boy who can be heard running as he plays with toys in the attic. Another spirit haunting the home is said to be that of Nathaniel Hawthorne's son Julian. He has been heard on the upper floors making noise in what sounds like the activity of him playing with toys on the floors. He has also been spotted peeking over the garden fences on occasion. In addition to the apparitions seen, many visitors and employees also hear strange sounds. The toilets sometimes flush on their own, and the faucets turn on and off by themselves at times. The house was said to have been an end stop to the Underground Railroad, where slaves were freed in Salem. People have seen slaves running up and down the hidden staircases. So, Chris, tell us, were the tunnels leading to the House of the Seven Gables?
Yeah, there's supposed to be a very small door in the basement. I had a friend who, not only one friend had slept in those tunnels when he was at camp there, another one was a telephone employee, a telephone repairman. And he would go in the basement to find where the telephone lines and fix them, and he had seen a small door that would lead into the tunnels. It's probably about 3-4 feet high, and it's very similar to the door that comes out of Old Town Hall. It's at the same height. So yeah, they would then have tunnels leaving that building as well.
Now, what would be the purpose for the tunnels at the House of Seven Gables? I'm just curious. Because the slaves?
No, none of the tunnels were made for the Underground Railroad, but by that time they already existed, so might as well use them. The Turners and mostly the Turners, they were ship captains. So to be so close to the sea, you can maybe have a rowboat come up to in front of your house and smuggle your goods, off the coast there into the home. That's probably the original reason, and then also to be connected to other people in town who had access to the tunnels would be the reason.
So everybody was smuggling, huh?
Yeah, even back in the late 1600s they were. Even some of the old planters off of Bridge Street, like off of Woodbury Court, there is a home that if you go in the back door into the cellar and you get halfway through the house, you can actually see the tunnel begin in the middle of the house, and it's a large clay pile, clay sand, that blocks the entrance. And I was hoping that the little kid, before they had moved, I think maybe they went back to England before they left, the little kid could have like got the inspiration to dig them out and find me again, but
Yeah.
he didn't dig that much.
All right.
So
Now,
yeah, even the people during British rule were using them.
now you did mention earlier the Captain Joseph White and his murder. Now that's the Gardner Pingree house. That's located on 128 Essex Street in Salem. Now this mansion is said to be haunted by Captain Joseph White, who was brutally murdered in the townhouse in 1830. And I guess what happened was Joseph learned that the 82-year-old captain had made out a will leaving $15,000 to Miss Beckford. And it was then that he got the idea that if his great uncle by marriage were to die without a will, that his mother-in-law would then inherit half of the Captain White's, fortune, which was nearly $200,000. So Captain White's nephew was too impatient for his uncle to die naturally, so I guess he hired a hitman and named Richard Crowninshield. April 6, 1830, Captain White was brutally murdered when Crowninshield entered the house through a window that had been left open by Joseph earlier in the day, went to the bedroom where Captain White was sleeping, and fractured his skull with a club and stabbing him 13 times with a long dagger. So, basically, people claim to see ghostly faces looking out the second floor window, and many have claimed to hear ghostly footsteps while touring the house. And I guess this house, they prosecuted the involved by such a high standard, they called the house the Clue House, and I guess that's where the game Clue came from. One of my questions to you is, do you believe the captain actually haunts this house?
People have mentioned it. I'm not sure. It's not nothing I've felt yet.
Because normally if you die in the house, you tend to stay there, no?
A lot of times. There's a house on the corner of Essex and Flint Street that a woman was murdered in the, what was it, like 94, I think? Two
Okay.
teenagers went in the house and bludgeoned her death and wrapped her up in a mattress.
Oh, wow.
But I don't know anyone who's lived there now to see if something had happened there. But yeah, I think a lot of times I think the people who owned the Village Tavern, they bought a house a little bit cheaper in, I think, Wynnum, after a husband murdered his wife there. I'm not sure if they mentioned things yet, but I could ask them again.
Oh.
But I think at times they can.
Well, I kind of believe that
But the funny thing about this,
they choose where they want to remain. I mean, if he loved the house, he might stay there. But if he really didn't and there was somewhere else that he favored, he might be there.
sometimes you get trapped in places too.
That's true.
And it's usually your own entrapment that keeps you somewhere.
So is the captain's ghost
the
the
funny
only
thing-
recorded spirit there, or has he ever caused harm to the living?
No, I think they only mention maybe his spirit maybe up in the window. They keeps, but it's something that you hear more by. If you're just walking by, one of the tour groups in town, you might have heard something. I've known people at the PBS Essex Museum, and none of them really has mentioned any of the ghost stories there. It's usually you hear one of the tour guides mention something because the PBS Essex owns the building.
Oh, okay.
But it's possible.
All right.
Okay, Joshua Ward House is located at 148 Washington Street in Salem. While Joshua Ward himself made his wealth from Salem's port and sea business, it's the location of the house, not the man who gave it its name, which inspires the home's notoriety. The Joshua Ward House has seen its own fame in books on the collective hauntings of Salem and comprehensive segment of the History Channel series, Haunted History. The Joshua Ward House is built over the site of the original home of George Corwin, the sheriff of Essex County in 1692, Constructed in 1780, the Joshua Ward House occupied Sheriff George Corwin, who is best known for imprisoning over 150 people during the witch hysteria. George Corwin's uncle is Judge Jonathan Corwin, who tried and declared the residents as guilty witches. After George Corwin died, his family feared the public would be angry at him because he declared their friends and family as witches, that they would desecrate his grave and body, so they buried him in the basement of his own mansion. Years later, they exhumed and reburied him in the Corwin plot in the Broad Street Cemetery. Reports testify to cold hands put on the backs of house employees, candles knocked over and twisted into S shapes, mysteriously locked doors, overturned furniture, and cold spots. Pretty standard fare for many ghost activities, but perhaps the most compelling piece of supernatural evidence comes from a Polaroid taken of a new agent when the house served as a real estate office in the 1990s. The new associate posed for a headshot at the bottom of the stairs. A few minutes later, when the picture developed, a black dressed figure of a woman was clearly visible standing at the top of the stairs. This is considered the Witch of the Joshua Ward House. Many know this photo well because a lot of people claim it looks like Diana Ross because of the hair. Many people still believe Corwin haunts his own mansion along with a woman who have been seen wandering the halls. They claim the second floor is freezing cold. Often alarms go off that engage calling police and fire departments. A janitor quit his job right on the spot after bumping into a woman with long black hair who's thin and very pale. She has also been seen sitting in a chair upstairs staring out the window. There are two entities who reside here who were innocent victims of the witch trials, perhaps looking for Sheriff George Corwin. Entity of a woman with black, rather wild hairstyle. She is thought to be one of the victims unjustly executed. Her apparition has been reported roaming the hallways throughout the building. The other being the male entity of Giles Corey, a man falsely accused of being a warlock who was tortured and killed by the crushing rocks method of interrogation. He isn't satisfied that his final curse has stayed with not only Sheriff George, but has affected many sheriffs who followed in the years after his horrendous death. Trash cans are found turned over, books are pulled from shelves, rooms are found in disarray, candles are taken out and melted, cold spots are felt in certain corners of certain rooms. An older male entity has been seen sitting in a rocking chair by a fireplace in which people claim to be Corwin himself. Back in the mid-1980s, people have reported being choked by an unseen entity. This could be Sheriff George trying to reclaim his authority, or it could be one of his victims trying to show the living what they suffered. Items are moved around the mansion and candles are bent into the shape of an S, and that's my question. Why? What purpose would any entity have to bend candles in the shape of an S?
Not too sure. I mean, it's just easy shape to make. I don't know why particularly an S. I know about the book coming off the shelf. The guy who owned the real estate company, he was thinking about a question, and the entity actually pulled the book off the shelf and opened it up to the page where there was the answer to his question he was pondering.
Wow.
And he would also be the person who had to deal with all those alarms going off. And they would wake him up at 2 o'clock in the morning. He would get a phone call from the alarm company saying it's gone off again. And sometimes, 1 week, it could be every night that these alarms would go off. And he would have to go back to the house and turn it off, and inform the police there was another false alarm. But the ghosts would just play with him all the time doing that. And also, the house was on the Discovery Channel, is one of the most haunted houses in the country.
Is it possible that one of the victims of the witch trials name started with an S? Was it somebody that could have been?
I just think, like he said, it was
Sarah
easy to
Good?
bend that way. Could be. Now, isn't the Joshua Ward house one of the most haunted ones in Salem? Haunted houses?
It's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Especially, supposedly the most infamous. Um, the Captain West House, which is now the Salem Inn, is also very popular for people traveling to Salem to stay in because they have several haunted houses.
Yep.
Haunted rooms.
Yep.
My friends always stay there, and they have a dog. And as you come in the front door, the parlor to the left with a picture of Captain West, and the dog would actually cower before coming to the room, realize that its owners would have to force it to go, and then he bolts up the stairs past the captain's picture. So
Wow.
the Salem Inn definitely is very haunted. The Joshua Ward house, my friends used to work for Higgins Printing that was there. And I guess they mentioned things that would happen, but they tended to just get used to it after a period of time. And it also is a home that George Washington had slept in because Joshua Ward was a Mason, and he used a quarters in the bottom floor to house the new Mason Lodge that got back the Masons who got back together after the Revolutionary War. And so that's why he stayed there.
Now, I was just recently there taking pictures at the Joshua Ward house probably a couple of weeks ago, and they just finished the job, and they've recently just turned it into the house into a hotel or a bed and breakfast. Do you believe that was the right decision? I mean, why don't they just leave history alone? Why do they have to do this? Like they did with the old Salem jail. Why do they have to turn it into condos? Why couldn't they just leave a piece of history the way it was?
Money.
I mean, the last people have been in business for a long time, and even back before 1950, there was a building in front of it, which was Ghibli's, which is now up in 114. It's a tuxedo store.
Yep.
Okay, so originally there was a building before in front of the Joshua Ward house. It was put there, probably around the turn of the last century, and they would use the tunnel that comes out of the Joshua Ward house, similar to how Daniel Lowe would use his tunnel to move goods from the warehouse. So the Joshua Ward house maybe was just their warehouse, and they would move the tuxedos back and forth through the tunnels into the Ghibli's store. So I mean, it's been a long time since it's been very commercial. So it would be more of a new thing to actually turn it into a historical property, because it's been a long time since it has been.
Basically turning it into a bed and breakfast brings more tourists, brings them in there. The history of the house.
No. It's about the history, but I doubt the new owner really wants to really push the whole ghost image of the home or even the tunnels about it.
You were never allowed in the Joshua Ward house.
I think it's just old Salem money.
I look at it like, No,
but I knew people who knew the old owner.
Okay.
People take these places like this that are famous for being haunted or what have you, and they convert them into some kind of business, and people will come there because they are reportedly haunted. So that brings them in business. They make money.
Yeah, because you were never allowed in the Joshua Ward house.
A little bit contrary. No, the previous owner hated everything about the haunting and everything else, and I believe the previous owner is friends with the current owner, and he has the same mindset. So even though that you would have lots of people be coming to town who want to stay in a haunted house, this is actually set up to be a place that millionaires who want to visit Salem could reside in. And I don't think they're trying to actually promote the house to these millionaires as haunted. I approached them to talk about the tunnels and things, and I think the new owner is very hands-off on those odd thoughts, I guess he might say. And,
do you find that
it's
weird?
Like $500 a night to stay there?
You're kidding. Wow, that is insane.
Well,
if he was friends with the previous owner?
Yeah. $500. Oh my goodness. That's wild. Okay. All right. Moving on.
He's also
Yep.
the guy who built that hotel is also the one who bought the building on Essex Street where it had the broom closet used to be and
Yep.
the women's clothing shop there. They're
Yep.
taking that and turning it into a $500 a night hotel as well with a bowling alley in the basement.
Really? Oh my God, there's gonna be a lot of changes when our kids grow up, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
So they didn't do it for tourists. They basically did it for rich people.
Yeah, which is, contrary. You would think someone would do a bed and breakfast because the Salem Inn's making so much money. And Hawthorne, after the Salem Inn started making a lot of money, started saying, oh, we got a haunted place too. That you would take the most haunted house in the country and open it up to this. But it's the opposite. I don't think they want to mention much about that at all. They're lucky they mentioned George Washington slept there.
Huh. That's interesting. All right, I have some questions for you here. Moving on to St. Peter's Church, which I believe is across from the Salem Cinema, right? Now,
yes.
Basically, the original church was actually a wooden structure, and the stone structure we see today was built in 1833. A chapel was built in 1871 over the graveyard associated with the church. Now, while the bodies remained underground, they were initially buried. The headstones were moved to new locations, including in the chapel walls. Why would they do something like that? Why would they leave the bodies in the ground and take the headstones and put them into the walls of this? Because you can go there and they have the little cemetery where just the stones are. You know what I mean? And then they have them on the walls like that. Why would they do that to these people? Any idea?
Well, that's like a contention about the stories about those headstones. One thought is that these are the headstones in the front that people didn't completely pay for. So the stonemason would cut it, engrave all this, and then, wasn't paid for them. And then the church might have held on to them and then put them in the front. Other thought is, yes, where the chapel was added, that those bodies were there. So they, put the headstones up front to still commemorate them where the building's on top. I do have, I think it's more recent, maybe like 1970s, they did some construction, like maybe street construction around that church, and they dug up some skeletons, and they had to actually bury these people again. So there was like brand new death certificates in the 70s for these skeletons.
Oh, wow.
And a friend of mine emailed them like the screenshots of these records.
That's interesting. I just find that
So
I always
the guy who
find
built that
interesting.
chapel,
Yeah.
same guy who built the Marine Hall where the PBS Essex Museum is.
Okay.
And he built the Stephen White House that's on the Commons next to in the Joseph White House, I think, too. So he was the architect hired by the Whites to build all these tunnels.
Huh.
William Roberts was his name.
Okay. Well, to give the listeners a little idea about the church, inside the church they hear footsteps, knockings, moanings, and sad noises. They say at certain times of the night floating ghostly figures are seen hovering over the grass and parking lot where the old graves were situated. In the front of the cemetery, a ghost of a man has been crouching in the corner as if he is fearing a dreadful beating. On the Brown Street side of the church is a wooden door where there is said to be a woman that hangs out and haunts the door as if she's in shackles. Also witnessed repeatedly by the door are a couple of ghostly men who lean against the frame as they're observing the living going about their business. So that's pretty cool. What do you got on Howard Street Cemetery, Roger?
Howard Street Cemetery is located on Howard Street, of course, in Salem. The Howard Street Cemetery is located beside the old Salem Jail, and it is filled with many old gravestones, and the majority of them are in great shape. The cemetery land is directly correlated with Giles Corey, who was an elderly farmer accused of witchcraft, but he refused to stand trial and make a plea. As a result to refusal to plead, He was stripped of his clothing, forced to lay in the field, have a board placed over his body, and heavy stones were placed on the board. With 5 days of refusing to make a plea or ask for mercy, his request of more weight was that of his 3rd day of torture on Monday, September 19th of 1692. Right before his last breath, he directed a curse at Sheriff Corwin and all the people of Salem. In any place of justice, the old possibility of spirits must be very strong. The history of law enforcement and jail conditions in the 19th century were particularly brutal, and who knows what spirit or spirits it has that walks among the ancient tombstones there. Giles Corey is the most famous ghost seen wandering that part of the cemetery, which is the corner of the cemetery that borders the parking lot of the old jail. Some hear moaning in that part at night. Most of his ghost was seen before the fire in 1914. Now, why would a fire cause a ghost to not be seen anymore or seen less?
Well, it's a funny story. Where Daniel Lowe's is, or Rockefeller's, is where the church that persecuted the people in Salem village, town. This would be town. Well, that original building today resides behind the Essex Institute. It looks like a one-room school building painted red. Now, when they went to move that building, it originally was moved onto Boston Street at the foot of the North River where a drawbridge was. It was a watch house. And they extended the watch house by putting the church in the back of it. Short period after that, a descendant of the Crucible, John Proctor, was played by Daniel Day-Lewis. He was one of the people who were hung, and his wife up there on Gallows Hill. Now, the insult to injury about John Proctor is that he's actually hung on the back left corner of his own property. That's why it's called Proctor Street, that runs in back of that Walgreens lot we were talking about earlier. Would actually buy the building away from the watch house and put the church, the building that persecuted his ancestor, on his ancestor's property, and it would be continuing the family tradition of having taverns on that spot. So this was the first congregational church in the country, or the first church in the country, and for a period of time it was used as a tavern and a horse stable. So the first church in the country was full of horse shit for a little while. So the building stays there for a period of time.
Now, how would you like to go
And
sit
then
down,
it gets moved to its current
room,
location.
have a nice
Yeah,
glass
so,
of
so there's a little bit more. Yeah.
Huh.
So the building that persecuted all these people was full of horse shit for a little while.
Wow.
And then it was moved by the Essex Institute to a location. So the next thing we built there was a leather factory. The corn made a thing to go onto shoes, like a varnish or something. And that factory caught on fire, and that burnt, half, 3/4 of town down in 1914. And the thing about it is that now up there on that ridge there, or a little bit higher on the corner of Proctor and Pope, where the fire actually went up those streets and followed what's called Castle Hill. And could there be actually a sense of revenge for these innocent victims, that on the spot that they were hung is where the fire started that took out 3/4 of the town? And it was Giles Corey was seen on that night in the graveyard laughing at a bunch of nuns as the town was burning. The other thing about Castle Hill is, now Castle Hill is something that's not really there anymore. The Derbys inherited it after the Revolutionary War, when Colonel Brown had his property confiscated. The town said that they took it, but really what happened was that Derby's wife was related to Brown, so she inherited his mansion on top of that piece of property. It was built on a site of a Indian massacre in, I think, like 1624. So it was before Conan had brought down the people from Gloucester. And the Micmac or the Tarratines were coming down from Maine, and they were killing the local Indians up and down the coast from probably Rhode Island back up to Maine because they were encroaching on the French trade with the furs. So there was an Indian massacre on top of Castle Hill, and then probably with their village that would be down off of Canal Street and up Roslyn in that neighborhood all the way to probably Saltonstall. And even that neighborhood on Roslyn Street and Saltonstall, the school's haunted. Running across Lafayette Street in front of the school, there's people seeing ghosts running back and forth. There was a house that was on Roslyn Street where at 3 o'clock in the morning some drunk was yelling, "Not tonight, tomorrow night, not tonight, tomorrow night," for about a half hour. And the next night, the person who actually owned the place I was staying with got hit in a beer bottle at 3 o'clock at night. And the person said, "Not tonight, tomorrow night." So not only do you have this where the fire started, it's where these people were hung, but it's also near the location of an Indian massacre in 1624. So the whole piece of property there has like a long curse that, Giles Corey is just a more recent addition to it. And the last time Giles Corey was seen in that graveyard was in 1999. And he's said to show up anytime there was a great tragedy in Salem. And there was a woman down in the Willows who was about 27 years old who had black hair, who committed suicide the last time she was seen in that graveyard. And unfortunately, it was in another graveyard with my ex-fiance. And if I was actually in Howard Street graveyard, it could have warned me about how much of a head case she could have been. So I was in the wrong graveyard that night. But,
all right.
Actually, the weird thing was that he had stayed over my house that night, and her family actually thought it was her who had got murdered because it was fitting her description: age, color, hair, weight. And so in the morning, I'm getting all these phone calls trying to find out if she was alive. And that was the last time Giles Corey was seen in the graveyard.
Wow, that's fascinating. Very fascinating. Going on to Hawthorne Hotel.
And actually, I get along with
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Hawthorne Hotel.
I was just saying, I'm friendly with him. Yes.
What was that? I couldn't hear you.
I was letting you continue about Hawthorne Hotel.
Oh, okay. Paranormal activities in the hotel have been attributed to sea captains who were returning to their gathering place. There have been many stories surrounding the hotel that seem to indicate that there could be spirits or ghosts lingering in the building. In a room of the hotel referred to as the lower deck, an employee of the hotel who was responsible for setting up the room and arranging the tables was quite startled after performing his duties, then leaving the room, only to return to find the room rearranged. Room 612 is reportedly one of the most haunted locations in the hotel. The apparition of a woman has been seen to wander the halls outside the room, often pausing in front of the door. In the room itself, guests have often complained about an uneasy feeling as if someone was sharing the room with them. Room 325, there have been several reports of lights and faucets turning on and off. There have also been reports of a baby crying in distress, feeling of being touched. Several hotel guests have reported hearing strange sounds and having strange occurrences. The hotel also has a large wheel in the hotel restaurant which turns around as if controlled by hands of a long-dead seafarer. It is also thought that the original land beneath the hotel was once an apple orchard that was owned by Bridget Bishop, who was the first individual to be hanged at Gallows Hill. Now, I thought the Lyceum was the apple orchard of Bridget Bishop. I didn't know that Hawthorne Hotel, or was it the same, so big that it just filled that area?
No, the apple orchard is where the Lyceum or Turner Seafood is now, and her house is where the Salem 5 Bank is.
Oh, okay.
And that house where the Salem 5 is actually the house that Hawthorne had based the Seven Gables exterior on, because her house she inherited from her first husband, Oliver, had many gables. And there was also another gabled tavern where the Fountainside Diner is, So those are the
Okay.
two buildings that influence Hawthorne's exterior look at the Seven Gables, because the Seven Gables at that time had no gables, or few
Yeah.
gables.
Yeah, I remember Roger
But
saying.
where the Hawthorne Hotel is, that was where Higginson had his house, and he said forever in front of my home there would be a training ground for the local militia. So that would have been Higginson's property before it would turn into the Andrews block or something like that. And there was called later Wakefield Place and the Franklin Building before the Hawthorne Hotel.
Wow.
But it being haunted, I've heard stories about in the basement, which looks like the bottom of inside of a ship that the room is.
Yep.
And the banquet staff would talk about, yes, rearranging stuff because they used to have psychic fairs in there that would work at.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone working the fair ever noticed anything, but the staff would tell us stories about what was going on there. And I think about the different rooms is they didn't start promoting those rooms until the Salem Inn started making money about having haunted rooms, and then all of
Okay.
a sudden they had haunted rooms also. But recently somebody did mention they had a room where the toilet kept flushing,
Yeah.
and I think some of the rooms that like, a friend had rented one of them, and they have rooms that are like doors off the rooms that get locked up, and somebody picked the lock, and there was like old bathrooms that sometimes you don't have access to anymore in some of the rooms. So I don't
Wow.
know if the old bathrooms make funny noises next to the real ones, or.
Huh.
But there
That's
was a
interesting.
person who did jump off the building in 1996
Really?
on the Essex Street side.
Oh, okay.
It was sort of
Wow.
like a copycat thing. 'Cause there was somebody who, a couple months or a year before, jumped off the building on the. You got the bunghole, and it has that row of buildings.
Yep.
He jumped off the roof of that building. So then it
Oh,
was
wow.
less than a year later, then someone jumps off the Hawthorne Hotel.
God, Salem has a lot of history, don't it? It really does.
Yeah.
Roger, why don't you take us into our last
Also, Derby Street.
location? Yep. Go ahead.
You know, I was just
Derby Street is also in American history the place with the most prostitutes and brothels.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
I would have
sometimes you
loved.
can find drunken women who
Yeah.
let the spirit of prostitutes into them.
I would have loved to live back then in this area. It just would. I just have such a fascination for it that I must have in the past because I just love it so much. But we have one more location, Roger. If you want to take us into that.
had you lived back there, you might have been hung as a witch.
You very well, very well, absolutely.
But I was
Yes.
just thinking about the people jumping off the buildings. You know, once you jump off there, if you get halfway down and change your mind, it's a little bit late, you know.
Yeah, it's too late.
Anyway, Old Town Hall, and this is the last one we have, you guys. A little history lesson. Is located at 32 Darby Square in Salem, opened in 1816. Was used as the city's government headquarters until 1837. Old Town Hall has been featured in numerous Hollywood movies such as Hocus Pocus and Bride Wars. Now it houses various events such as art shows and its theater for Salem's Living Museum and theatrical productions. The Old Town Hall is supposedly haunted. Poltergeist activity has been reported in and around the faculty since the day construction began. It's as large as its items as large as heavy bases, chairs, and doors move on their own, and also at times when the place is closed and empty, objects have been seen moving around on their own. Some people have seen ghostly men and women appearing in the windows from inside at night and also walking up and down Front Street. So why do you think, or who do you think haunts the Old Town Hall?
They say it's a woman who haunts it. Um, the biggest stories I've really heard was that they have an elevator, and sometimes it breaks down a lot. And there was one elevator repairman who came, and he got so scared by the ghost and how the ghost was playing with the elevator, he left the job, and he actually got fired that day. and the guy who's in charge of the building that would let the people in and out, I think found him somewhere else at another time, or he was working for another company, and that company got the contract, and it got the story of how the ghost was harassing him, and he got fired from that company because he wouldn't stay there and finish the job.
Oh. Now, it's got to be an intelligent haunt due to the fact that it's moving stuff around and it's poltergeist activity. I would assume.
Yeah, yeah, and she knows how to screw with elevators.
Yeah.
Well, now you have residual haunts where I remember one I watched a video on the Ghost Hunters episode where they were at some place and the woman would still be cooking in the kitchen.
Yeah.
You would see like the pans move around and stuff, but it was a residual.
Hmm. Oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Okay.
And I guess the guy who used to own the house was a baker, so they constantly walk into the house of smelling baked goods. They could smell one day, blueberry muffins. Another day, they could smell banana bread.
Oh wow.
And that's reported in a lot of cases where you have like residual haunts and stuff like that. Is you may smell the smells of food cooking or whatever they were cooking at the time. You would smell like if they were baking bread, you would smell bread. Or like he said, blueberry muffins, whatever they were doing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Also, like their perfume, maybe, or something like that. You might smell their perfume. If it's a female, you might smell cigar smoke or something. If it's a male, or pipe or something like that.
My one friend had died. He still mysteriously was pushed into the water and found floating up by what is now sea level on Pickering Wharf.
Oh wow!
And he visited me that morning. Actually, he visited like 5 people that he died, and so I get a phone call maybe a couple hours later saying that he died. But he was always into ghosts. He was in a house in Chelsea that had a tunnel, and inside the tunnel there was a ghost. So he was always fascinated by them. He would let our friend Dan Tremblay do ghost stories of these videos he would show of haunted houses throughout New England that he still shows at Hollywood Hits up in Danvers. So when he died, he took full advantage of becoming a ghost himself in some ways, and he was not allowed to smoke in the house, and it would aggravate his wife when he did. So a couple of years after he died, she was doing her makeup in the mirror, getting ready to go on with her day, and she could smell cigarettes behind her. And it was him, just giving her a hard time, just being a smartass, smoking.
Oh, wow. Well, Chris, you have been absolutely fantastic. I want to thank you for being on the show. You are just a wealth full of knowledge, and I want to thank you very much.
We do appreciate it. I learned a lot of things.
You're welcome.
Yeah. No, I've learned a lot of things, too. Roger, I want to thank you as well.
Oh,
always a pleasure.
Wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Always a
nice
pleasure.
Meeting you.
Well,
nice meeting you too.
Yeah, and like I said, you wanna read up on Chris's books. You can go to Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. You can check out his Facebook page, his website.
Yeah, Wicked Good Books and Found.
Yep, and yeah, you just yep. Absolutely. I want to thank all the listeners.
New one coming out called Sub Rosa.
Which new one?
A book called Sub Rosa, which talks about how the Forbes and the Russells made their fortune by Thomas Perkins, who owned the lot where the Hawthorne Hotel is, by selling opium. They're connected to Skulls and Bones. It talks about the possible assassination of 3 presidents. It gives you his history of Salem. Like we've Thomas Dixon, I forget his next name, Dixon, who invented the number 2 pencils in town. So it's a continuing story of the tunnels and all the smugglers who actually affected American history. It's the book I'm writing now.
Oh wow! I would love to get a hold of some of your books. I definitely want to add that to my bookshelf collection because you are absolutely just very fascinating and you know so much, and I could pick your brain all night. But I want to thank you both. I want to thank all the listeners. And next week we have Paranormal Graveyard on Monday with I think it's Angels and Guardian
Angels and
Spirits.
Spirit Guides.
Spirit Guides. There you go. There it goes.
Also, tomorrow night is the Half Past Dead Roundtable, and everybody that wants to come, we appreciate it. If you come and just enjoy it, we're just going to talk on the paranormal, whatever comes up, and we have a few people going to be there. Chris, you're more welcome to come join us, buddy.
What day is it again?
It's tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, same time as this show was, but it's tomorrow night.
Okay.
All right. Well, again, thank you both. Thank everybody, and we will see you on Monday. So have a great night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.